It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome Marine Javid from the Canada-Pakistan Chamber of Commerce to introduce our guest speaker today. Marine.
Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I invite Hina, I would like to thank each one of you for being here tonight. I want to thank a few of our guests, especially Honorable Greg Sorbara, who's the Chancellor of York University, to be here. Thank you very much. Consul General of India is here today. Thank you for being here. Consul General of Pakistan, Honorable Raza Muridi, and I believe I saw Honorable Shafiq Qadri here. Thank you very much for being here. Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar has served as Minister of State for Economic Affairs for 3 years and a Minister of State for Finance and Economic Affairs for another 2 years. During these years, she was the lead person in Pakistan's economic diplomacy, both bilateral and multilateral. She successfully conducted 4 Pakistan Development Forums and the Third World Islamic Economic Forum. Hina graduated with a BSc Honours in Economics from the prestigious Lahore University of Management Sciences and MSc Honours in Business Management from the University of Massachusetts. Hina was first time elected as a member of the National Assembly from District Muzaffargarh in southern Punjab in 2002. She served as the Parliamentary Secretary for Economic Affairs Division from 2003 to 2005. Hina served as the Minister for State for Economic Affairs Division for 2005 to 2007. She was re-elected as a member of National Assembly in 2008 and served as the Minister of State for Finance and Economic Affairs Division from 2008 to 2010. From February 12th to July 18th of 2011, Hina was the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs. In July 19, 2011, Hina was appointed as the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs. Please join me to welcome Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon and an assalamu alaikum to everyone. And let me just say that Marine already thanked the many distinguished guests that we have here today, so I am going to thank them again and all the audience. It is particularly a matter of privilege for me to be in front of an audience which is as wide and as honored as all of you. So I'm going to start with thanking Marine for really making it all possible. From my perspective, I think your High Commissioner to Pakistan, Mr. Greg Koikas, and Marine have actually been the one who pushed me to come, and here I am. So today I've been asked to talk about realizing South Asia potential. I chose to talk, not asked to talk. I chose to talk about realizing South Asia potential beyond conflict perspectives from Pakistan. And I'll say that the reason why I chose this topic was that I must say when I came to the job as the 26th Foreign Minister of Pakistan and the many titles that preceded that, the first woman Foreign Minister, the youngest woman Foreign Minister, etc., I came to the job with absolutely no preconceived notions. The job almost came to me because I was considered to be quite the finance, economic affairs, sort of, a focused person within the cabinet, within the parliament. And foreign affairs was something that I knew from economic diplomacy perspective, but never the hardcore. So as the job came to me, I came to the job with absolutely no preconceived notions. Typically, Pakistan's foreign policy has been driven by what I call trying to court the distant to be able to handle or manage the close. And as I go through the rest of my talk, I hope you will agree with this assessment. Because I think over the last many years, over the last 60 years, Pakistan's foreign policy and Pakistan's economic diplomacy has been overwhelmed by trying to manage and trying to cultivate distant relationships with very distant countries. And in all of that time, because prioritize we always must, whether it's a student, whether it's a businessman, whether it's a politician, we must, it is the law of life, that if we are to succeed, we have to prioritize. So when you prioritize trying to nurture relations so distant, you will end up ignoring those which are closer to home, those which are in your neighborhood. So when we talk about region, because in order to realize South Asia's potential, we have to talk about the region. How do we define region in today's world? In today's world, defining region, defining neighborhood, defining family, defining friends has all become very difficult because we have the social media. So we have friends on the social media whom you may never have seen. We have the global village or the world at large, where distances mean nothing. You know, trends, sometimes stability, sometimes instability, sometimes financial crises. And we just saw in the financial crisis of 2008 that it took days, if not hours, for one thing to fall after the other. From it to cross borders, like there are no borders. Physical borders don't exist when it comes to financial crisis. As we are increasingly finding out in the world today, physical borders also do not exist when it comes to conflict and when it comes to instability. And my country, in some ways, is a case in point, because in the 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan, it has slowly, almost not visible to the eye, but it has slowly permeated through the borders and crossed over into Pakistan. And Pakistan is suffering today. And Pakistan has possibly been suffering for the last 5 to 10 years. But as Pakistan is correcting some of those wrongs, I believe Pakistan will stop suffering in the next 5 to 10 years. But those trends have to be changed now, and the trends have changed as we speak. But so coming back to talking about the region, let's talk, eventually I think the region, as it can be defined, even in today's world, has to have a starting point. And the starting point of the region has to be of countries which are closest to you. And which are the countries which are closest to you? It is countries which are your immediate neighbors. Because no matter what you do, a country cannot change your geography. You cannot change who your parents are and who your relatives are, and you cannot change your geography. Everything else in life, you can change. You can change jobs, you can change titles, you can change friends, you can change everything. Countries cannot change neighborhoods. We have the option of changing neighborhoods. We can migrate. Countries cannot migrate. So to ignore your neighborhood is to bring upon yourself the curse of living without realizing your full potential. And that, I think, is the story of South Asia. And that, I feel, is a story that South Asia must not espouse to itself for the future. Let it be the past of South Asia. Let it not be the present and the future of South Asia. And if you have to change the future of South Asia, we have to start today. We have to start from the present. So the other distinction or definition of region, if we insist, can be of countries which are neighbors of your neighbors. So the broader region, right? And in the case of Pakistan, it will have to be the two regions that Pakistan is part of. It's very interesting. As I told you, I was working for Pakistan's bilateral, multilateral relations, economic relations. And every few years, the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank decide to change where they place Pakistan. So sometimes they become South Asia. Then they say, oh, no, Pakistan is part of the West Asia bloc. Now you will not have as much funding available because, India will take some of it. But now you will because now you're in West Asia. So they themselves, many people, experts, confused about where does Pakistan belong. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Because it says that Pakistan belongs to both. Pakistan belongs to SAARC and to South Asia. And Pakistan also, at the same time, together with Afghanistan, belongs to West Asia, to Kyrgyzstan, to Uzbekistan, to all of these countries who are Central Asia. And Pakistan then, in being in the center of these two, also has the potential to play the role of the bridge. And how do you have the potential to play the role of the bridge? And what sort of a bridge? A cultural bridge, an oil bridge, an energy bridge, a social bridge. You have South Asia, which is starving for energy, oil, gas, etc., and you have West Asia, or what we call the Central Asian republics, which are brimming, together with Iran also, with all of those goods that we are starving for. So if we were to be, let's assume for a second that we had not been stupid in the last many years, that we had been smart people like you, like Southeast Asia, the ASEAN region, like the European region or European Union. Forget the European Union, Europe at large. And we had allowed ourselves to peacefully coexist for the sake of each other's and our own prosperity. Then imagine the bridges that would have been built. Imagine the pipelines that would be going from one region to the other. Imagine the road networks and the train networks that would be going, and the seaports that we would be using off each other rather than destroying off each other. So, this has been, unfortunately, the legacy of the past. Now, I will go back to where I was starting from, that when I came to the job, I came with no preconceived notions, right? I had no notions of what I wanted to do with this new job that I had found myself in. And very, very, very quickly, almost in a matter of 2 weeks, because I think what comes naturally very quickly, or otherwise it doesn't come at all. I saw myself to be completely imbibed by the Pakistan People's Party foreign policy objectives, as they were during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's time, who actually went and reached out to the region. And some people believe the reason for his demise was that he reached out to the region a bit too much. So very quickly, I realized that what we need to try and work on was to try and concentrate on the region, to concentrate on the countries. And if people tell you that these are impossible relations, we have to make them possible. For our own sake, for the sake of our children, and for the sake of a prosperous future, and for the sake of not repeating the mistakes of the past. I always say that I'm fine with the past. I'm fine with history, as far as we are able to learn our lessons from history and not repeat those mistakes. When we get into the business of repeating old mistakes, then we need to judge ourselves. We need to beat ourselves with a stick, and we need to correct ourselves. And if we do not correct ourselves, we will continue to suffer. We will continue to make our children suffer. So, to cut the long story short, let's come to the region. Let's come to the immediate neighborhood. Let's come to South Asia's potential and perspectives from Pakistan. Now, the most difficult, so we have 4 neighbors. We have China, we have India, we have Afghanistan, and we have Iran. Now, China is the proverbial relations. Pakistan and China have proverbial relations. I wish to emulate our relationship with China in 10%, 20%, 50% with all of our neighbors. We cannot never do it 100%. But at some level, to get the same bond with the other neighbors that we have with China, because China we will never consider to be outplaying us or second. We will never need to second guess. Everybody else, we will even guess, second guess their well-intended actions, words, possibly. So China, we've obviously, and every government in Pakistan has contributed to it. So I am not going to, I'm saying waste my time on it, because it is a relationship which is already very well engineered. Now we come to the most difficult, one impossible relationship, one difficult relationship. And can anyone guess which one is the impossible relationship? Council General? So, yes, we have India as what I would call the impossible relationship. And then we have, of course, the difficult relationship with Afghanistan. And I'm going to speak a bit about both, because I think sometimes it's not okay to just talk about the trends. Sometimes you have to go into details of events, of how we're going, and of what we have corrected, which you may not have noticed because it wasn't spicy enough to make the headlines. It wasn't fun enough. It wasn't exciting enough. Because most of the corrections never make it to the headlines. It's always the spicy stuff which will create a bit of chaos, a bit of interest, which will make it to the headlines. The corrections will never make it to the headlines. The corrections just keep on slowly, steadily correcting. And I will talk about some of the corrections that we have experienced in Pakistan. So now when it comes to India, of course there's the history, and you have known about it. Even people who may not be Pakistanis, Indians, or not have ancestors who are Indian or Pakistanis know about the Pakistan-India conflict. I was recently in Oslo delivering a lecture at the Nobel Peace Institute, and the chairman of the committee said to me that, ask some of your friends to solve Kashmir, and you get a prize. Not to me, but whoever does, he said. So I was just thinking, how many conflicts or how many issues are there in the world where somebody can say with such confidence that if you solve this, you get the Nobel Peace Prize? It just made me think that look at the global nature of this conflict. Look at the effect of this conflict. So we've had a history in which there have been flashpoints. We did not part ways in good, as it wasn't a good separation. We had a person like Qaid-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who till 1914 was known as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, who after the 1935 elections, and the story will go on, eventually 1945 the partition happened, 1947 the partition happened. And the partition brought in its throes not peace and stability. It brought a lot of blood, a lot of instability, a lot of rancor, a lot of deep-seated hatred which was experienced by people who saw their near and kin being killed in front of their own eyes. And it happened on both sides of the border. It was experienced collectively. So the years of history that we had with India, we had another thing that we experienced together. Whether you were Pakistanis or Indians, whether you were Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, you all collectively, or Parsis, you all collectively experienced this loss. And this loss of humanity, because you will hear stories which will bring you to tears of neighbors killing each other, neighbors whose families live together. So this is what conflict can do. This is what conflict can lead to. And then you have, so you begin, you have a bad start. We understand, you have a bad starting point. But what do you do as statesmen, as people, as civilians, as academics, as professors, as bureaucrats? What do you do after that? Do you seek to normalize this difficult relationship? Do you seek to be able to bring a trend which will be able to make you exist peacefully so that both of you could prosper and develop? Or do you, almost by choice, allow the basket of these disputes to increase exponentially over the years? And in this, again, I'm not pointing fingers at any one country. I'm talking about the collective region. I'm talking about collectively both the countries. And I'm talking about an equal portion of blame to be taken by both the countries. So you saw, of course, the 1971 separation of Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh, and you saw a role of India which many will sort of say much about. And then you saw other things. You saw Kargil. Before Kargil, you saw the Indian forces taking positions in the 1980s and on Siachen, and thus adding another severely disputed physical territory between the two countries. So this dispute basket, instead of disputes being taken out, solved, and put in the other basket, the baskets of disputes was being increased, was being contributed to, almost as if that was what our objective was, to add on to the disputes, to add on to the rancor. Now, as time passes, the disputes between the two countries, easy guess, only increase. And people would say, of course they had to. We had a bad start. We hated each other. Of course they had to because the partition was ugly. Of course they had to because the past was very hostile. Of course they had to because the memories were very, very terrible. Now, please compare. Please let this thought be where it is for a moment. And let's just take ourselves, a bit distance from this thought. And look at what is happening around the world. What is happening in your region? What is happening in East Asia? What is happening in Europe? Give me an example of one region, or give me an example of one country which has emerged as a tiger, as a lion, as a cat even, a prosperous cat, amongst a region which is all in depravity and terrorism and, all sorts of poverty and hunger. It has not happened, and people have been smart enough to realize that this cannot happen. Regions have been smart enough to realize that this cannot happen. You have the GCC countries combine together, work together, and of course they have political disputes, and the political disputes will continue. But there's still the GCC countries which are working to try and work together as much as is possible. You have ASEAN, and within ASEAN you have Myanmar. Now, we all know that until 2 years back, it had a very different past than the rest of the other countries. But it still got it within the ASEAN region because it understands that you cannot even have one small country which is not part of the mutual collective rise, that the region will suffer because of that one country which will be left out. So this smart behavior, look at the European Union. And now convince me that these countries or these regions have not had disputes which are probably match up in proportion to our disputes. East and West Germany, France and Britain, the South China Sea, Vietnam, China, many other countries, part of it, So it's not the lack of disputes which is making them do this. It is just smart behavior. It is just looking at the bigger picture and looking at the bigger trend rather than enamoring yourself and being caught up by these stupid, petty, hostility and politics and just tit-for-tat behavior. You will do this and we will do that. Which doesn't take you anywhere. Because if I'm truly going to be wearing a regional lens, then I understand that when I harm them, I harm myself first. because she is my neighbor. It is going to permeate through the borders and come over me. We will not be able to stop it. It's like a tsunami. It's like a slow-moving flood. It's like what is happening in Pakistan right now. It's like what happened in Pakistan in 2010. That the flood was moving and you could not stop the flow of water. You could divert the flow of water by creating artificial, edifices or breaking them, artificial structures, but you could not stop the flow of water. In the same way, if you are going to harm others, it is going to come back. So we are this collective, almost national narrative that we have built against each other, where we want to, and we have done a fantastic, let's congratulate India and Pakistan on it. They have done a fantastic job at it. They have literally gone into the deepest hearts and minds of its people, of its children, and infiltrated them with hatred, rancor, animosity against each other. And the results are brilliant. So had the same energy gone in infiltrating these minds with love and the vision of a common future, imagine what would be the future, where we would be today. I believe it was a concerted effort, it was the policy decision to do what we did, collectively, both the countries. And here we are today. So this is the history, okay? What do you do about it? How do you take a go at it? Because this is, of course, extremely political also. And which leader will have the courage to stand up and say, I want to make peace with India at all costs? Or even more difficult, which leader in India will have the courage to say, I want to make peace in Pakistan? We had 10 years that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, a person I have great deal of respect, who I have met in multiple forums at multiple times, who I know was yearning to come to Pakistan and also his ancestral home. For 10 years, because of public pressure, he could not find the courage to come and visit Pakistan. These are the realities of this impossible relationship, okay? So what did we do? During our tenure, the Pakistan People's Party decided that we could not be okay with it, that we had to contribute whatever we could. And if it was small, good enough, at least it will be a start, and that we will not have reactive foreign policy anymore. So we will not wait for India to take this first step and then follow. We will make our own first step and expect India to follow. So we decided, let's do something which is considered to be impossible to do with India. Unsaid rule in Pakistan, unsaid policy, never approved by any forum, that we will not move on trade with India until the Kashmir dispute is solved. It's almost like saying we will never solve the Kashmir dispute, because you cannot have a country with which you have no normal relations. You can't have a country with which you do not even talk to across the table, and then expect yourself to start by solving the most difficult flashpoint between the two countries. So we decided that we need to normalize the atmospherics, the relations between the two countries to as much an extent as is possible. We need to normalize it so much so that we start talking to each other like normal people. As the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, when you were on the table, across the table, you had the Indians, it was almost like you expected abnormal behavior. And we would all be not speaking to each other as human beings, but almost as if we had to win points, score points. So we said, let's stop all of that. Let's start creating the environment to start treating each other as normal individuals. And since 1965, nobody in Pakistan had had the courage, no political party, no military government in Pakistan had had the courage to start the process of normalization of trade and visa regime. We decided to do that. And it was not popular. It was not popular domestically. It was not popular. It was not a vote gainer. We decided to go ahead and do it anyways, because we thought it was the right thing to do for Pakistan. And we thought that we were going to be putting the first steps of a long journey. We were going to be taking the first steps of a long journey. And guess what? As soon as we did this, we were highly unpopular. Our government was highly unpopular. We were attacked as people who could not care about, who were traitors, who did not care about national interests, who were making compromise on behalf of Pakistan, and that goes with the long tradition of Pakistan People's Party. But we kept at it. We did not go back. And within months, we had the positive list with India, which meant that only 1,200 items will be traded with India, converted into the negative list, which meant that only this many items which will not be traded, everything else will be traded. And the cabinet gave approval to the MFN status with India, so that we can move on and start normalizing trade with India. Now, of course, before the MFN status could happen, our government got changed, and hopefully this is something which is still in process, but the change from the positive list to the negative list actually happened. Then we decided that we are going to try and start cooperating with India when it comes to regional forums. So this typical view of Pakistan that India must not be on the table when it comes to Afghanistan, we changed that. We said we welcome India to be on the table when we discuss Afghanistan. We just do not want India to be using Afghan soil against Pakistan. So let's talk to each other like normal people, and let's try and figure these problems out like normal people. And we welcome India's economic contribution towards Afghanistan or any of the other neighbors. So we decided basically to not let the past define the future. We decided to chart out a new future. Now, as this went, we had many, as I said, challenges that came in the way. One of the biggest challenge, I believe, was when we had multiple invitations which came to the Pakistani Prime Minister and President to visit India, once at Mohali when there was the cricket match taking place, and then by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when President Zardari was traveling to Ajmer Sharif. Now, a typical reaction would be from within Pakistan that we will not let our leaders go because India has not sent its leader for the last 10 years. So again, we said we are not going to follow Indian policy on this. We are going to make our own policy. We sent Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani. We sent President Zardari. I myself went to India on a bilateral visit. So all of this was an effort to try and normalize as much as possible. And I think that had an effect. And I think that despite the fact that relations are not where they should be, and despite the fact what I consider myself to be an indefatigable optimist when it comes to India-Pakistan relations, but even my optimism has been compromised by the recent event of Prime Minister Modi calling off secretary-level talks based on Pakistani High Commissioner meeting the Indian, Kashmiri leaders. I think it was something which was not required. It was something which was always done. I, as Foreign Minister of Pakistan, visited India and met Kashmiri leaders. Nobody called off the talks. So if you call off the talks on something like this, that means that you will find it very difficult to restart the talks now. So you are wasting time. And I believe that every minute, every hour, every month must not be wasted on this. So that's where we are as far as India is concerned. And we hope that Pakistan and India's enmity will not hold the region hostage to this enmity anymore. I believe it will be wrong to say that Pakistan and India have not held the progress in SAARC back. I think we have contributed to not making SAARC what it could potentially become, and we are responsible. And I think it is about time that we start moving away from that trend and just understand that either we allow ourselves to mutually prosper or we continue at trying to mutually destroy each other, right? The 60 years have not been a good story of what we've been able to achieve by following a certain trend. I think it is time to change the trend. And I'm very happy to share with you that in Pakistan, this trend has changed. India bashing is not fashionable in Pakistan anymore. You don't get votes. You don't get points. We have elections. Even the Jamaat-e-Islami would not get votes on bashing India anymore. It's not fashionable. We don't like to do it. We have made people understand. In India, however, the trends are still very different. Everyone who bashes Pakistan gets more votes. We hope also that as a democracy which is maturer than Pakistan, which is older than Pakistan, in India, this trend will also change. And I know that there are real-time changes that need to be made on both sides, and we hope that we will be able to make it. Now coming to the next difficult. So having talked about the impossible relationship, coming to the difficult relationship. Now, Afghanistan is also very interesting to Pakistan. You speak to an average Pakistani and he will tell you, oh, the things we've done for Afghanistan. We opened our arms and our hearts and our houses and our borders to our Afghan brothers and sisters, 3.5 million refugees, all sorts of activities associated to that. No other country in the world will allow refugees to come and stay in the city centers. We allowed that. We allowed them to own property. We allowed them to do businesses, etc., etc., etc. And of course, look at the sacrifices that Pakistan made in trying to rid the Afghans from the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, flip over. Speak to an Afghan, and what do they think about Pakistan? And they will say, Pakistan interfering in our affairs, trying to tell us what to do, etc., etc. So the two narratives do not meet. For me, I got a reality shock. I'm not going to say reality check, because I did get a reality shock when I landed in Kabul for the first time, thinking great brotherly relations that I had read about. And I was told that I should not get out because it's a security hazard for a Pakistani to get out in the streets. And I said, how is that possible? These are our Muslim brother friends. How is it possible that I'm not able to get out and be, welcomed? because the narratives in the two countries are very different. Now, I do not want to go into the long history and who is right and who's wrong. Let's forget it. I believe past should be forgotten. If past is difficult, learn from it. Do not forget it in terms of historical lessons, but move on. So let's move on. Yeah. So let's move on. And very quickly, again, in our tenure, we realized that Pakistan needs to break away from the Afghan mind and the Afghan thought and the Afghan heart, this notion of Pakistan wanting to determine their future for them or determining their present for them. And since that's not something that we like to do, we will go to every extent to nurture that thought in the Afghans. Okay? So typically, Pakistan is believed to nurture the Pashtuns and to want the Pashtuns to lead and to be presidents and they don't have prime ministers yet, they might very soon. But so there's a typical notion that the Pakistani establishment and the Pakistani nation will only befriend the Pashtuns. So we said, let's continue our good relations with the Pashtuns, but let's go out and befriend practically everybody who's a non-Pashtun, whether it's a Tajik or a Panjshiri, a Northern Alliance, a Northern Front people, all the entities, all the groups who are considered to be inimical to Pakistan, who are considered to be enemies of Pakistan. Let's go and befriend each one of them. Guess what? Why? Because as a state, we do not have a choice but to befriend every Afghan who exists. As a state, we do not have the choice to pick up favorites. As a state, it is not in our business to tell them which president is best for you, because it's for the Afghans to decide which president is best for you. And whichever president can bring peace and stability in Afghanistan is best for Pakistan. He might be, Panjshiri, he might be Tajik, he might be Pashtun, he might be any other nationality or ethnic identity. Why do we care? We cannot afford to care. So let's not care, and let's prove to the Afghans that we do not care. So I'm very pleased to share with you that typically I know, as a matter of fact, that every foreign minister of Pakistan, the 25 foreign ministers who preceded me, each one of them probably had in their tenure at least 3, 4, 5 visits to Washington, D.C. As foreign minister, I happened to visit Washington, D.C. only once, and Kabul thrice. In my short tenure of 2 years, I made it a point to try and visit Kabul and to try and get, visitors from there as much as is possible, because we needed to work on gaining their trust. And it hasn't happened, and it will not happen overnight, and it will not even be visible in the next year or 2 years or 5 years, but it will happen over time as we change these behavioral patterns. It is happening. So when I went as foreign minister, my ambassador, which would have been an impossibility, was able to arrange meetings with practically every ethnic group in Afghanistan, practically every political party, those who were considered to be very, very hostile to Pakistan also. And we saw a different type of response. We saw a very welcoming response. Then we took our prime minister there and our president there, and each of those meetings, each one of them separately sat with all of these people. And then there was a time when, for lunch, some of them refused to come on the invitation of their own president, but when we insisted they come, they did come, and they had lunch with us. So, again, these will never make headlines, okay? But this is a change in trend, which is there to try and engineer a confidence within the Afghans that their future is for them to decide. We can only, as neighbors, assist them in whatever course they chart out for themselves. Any neighbor who thinks that they can do better than the people itself, I think that's the problem with Afghanistan generally, internationally also. Because each one of us, nation states, each one of us, the Western, Eastern, neighbors, etc., Iran, Pakistan, India, US, Britain, everybody believes they have a solution for Afghanistan. And they will go and put this pretty solution on the Afghans and expect them to behave. Let the Afghans decide what is their own solution. And you can imposter as many solutions as you wish, spend more of the $6 trillion that you already have on Iraq and Afghanistan together, and then, maybe 10 years later, I will ask you, is the region less radical or more? Is the region less violent or more? Is there more stability or less? As somebody who's coming from the region, I will say a yes to each one of them almost. That the region is today more violent, that the region today is more radical, and I cannot say that I come from a very stable region and that the stability of the region has increased in the last 10 years. I honestly cannot say that. I hope it will increase in the next 5 years, and I hope the seeds have been sown. But if you ask me, give me an analysis today, I will say it has not. Okay? And in some ways, I'm just going to take a bit of a sidestep and just add to this, because I think this is, coming from Pakistan, I cannot afford not to, and coming from a region where Afghanistan also exists, I cannot afford not to warn the world and all the participants over here of the dangers that we get into when we start relying on non-state actors to do the job that states are supposed to do. We did it in Afghanistan, and we are still suffering in that region because those non-state actors take forms and mutate into bodies and people, and we have objectives that states can never sponsor or espouse to. And then they come back to haunt you. You might be their creator, but they will come back and haunt you and bite you, as they did in 9/11. And then we spent a good 14 years trying to fix it. And look how much we've fixed. Haven't we fixed it all? And look what's happening in the Middle East as we speak. Another proliferation of support for non-state actors at different levels by different states. Another fixing the problem by creating more problems. Where did ISIS come from? Which weapons is ISIS using? Wasn't it in fixing the last problem that we created ISIS, and now in fixing ISIS, God knows what the hell we will create this time. So these are all realities. And policy, I think, again, this is not something that I read in the book, but one thing I realized while I was in the job, that the decisions that we take, the policies that we make today have lasting effects, have such lasting effects that, maybe my children will suffer or gain at the hands of the policy that I helped to create. It will not be even in my generation. Look at what happened in ridding the region from the dangers of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Look at the monsters that we created. And then, Pakistan is happily blamed for that, as if the funding did not come from any Western or Middle Eastern countries, as if all of it was funded, created, conceived, implemented only by the state of Pakistan and its intelligence agency. Let's get a reality check. Let's call a spade a spade. I'm willing to accept my role in it. Are you willing to accept yours? Are you willing to accept responsibility for the contribution that your countries have made? And I'm speaking collectively, again, not specifically. So in all of this, I think coming back to, again, having dealt with, I think, India, Afghanistan, the immediate neighbors, now coming to Iran. Because China, as I said, I don't need to talk about, we already have proverbial relations with them. I just want to get a part of the China relationship with all of my other neighbors. Now coming to Iran, I always say to our Western friends, especially to the Americans, that you give us excellent advice when it comes to India. They always tell us, befriend them, make peace with them, prosper together, etc. But you give us terrible advice when it comes to Iran. Because you always tell us not to befriend them, not to make peace with them, not to try and encourage them, not to try and, sort of have relationship, economic or others with them. And I always used to tell them, we do not have a choice. With our neighbors, we do not have a choice. So somebody might tell me having good relations with India is a bad thing. I do not have a choice, my answer is. Somebody might tell me having good relations with Iran is not a possible thing. I will say I do not have a choice as much as I do not have a choice with India or with Afghanistan. So with Iran, again, huge opportunities exist. There is the IPI, which became the IP, the Iran-Pakistan-India pipeline, which became then the Iran-Pakistan pipeline because India decided to move away from it. We, in our times, despite the fear of economic sanctions, because these sanctions are national sanctions, these are not UN sanctions. As a state, I have a responsibility to abide by every United Nations sanction. But every state states cannot make other states do what they will, right? States can have policy which are implemented within their states, and I think that's fair. But I think it's not fair when states feel they can enforce their policy that is being made in their Congress or their parliaments on other countries who have independent parliaments, independent Congresses, independent executives. We have the United Nations to do that, and that's why United Nations exists. So a sanction which is not a UN sanction is not a, but we can argue how applicable it is. So we decided to go with Iran-Pakistan pipeline. We decided to go and try and do a trade agreement with them where we could have, almost close to an FTA with them. We decided to go and trying to start build roads which were to connect our border areas so that trade was easier. And we took many, many steps which were probably not taken any time before with Iran. Because, as I said, when it comes to our neighbors, they might be popular internationally or they might be unpopular internationally. We do not have a choice. We have to make sure that we are popular with each other. With India, we have to make sure that we are popular with each other, and I really do say it from my heart. I don't think I'm in the business of scoring points on behalf of any of my neighbors, because when I'm, I'll give you a simple example. When your foreign minister was here, in Islamabad, we came out of a press conference, and as I came out, one of our perky journalists told me, "Why did you make that statement?" Because we had him. So I said, I made that statement because when you had him, you also had me. Because if you're going to contract the space for him to function within India, you're contracting the space for Pakistan to benefit from that. If I'm committed to this, I have to increase, as he has to increase mine, and as he did. When I was in New Delhi, I think the reception, the general warmth, and just from your officials, if you reach a point and you can argue your way through a situation, I think that's a good point. That means you understand each other and you trust each other to quite an extent. So I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm just going to say that I wanted to just talk about these issues not from a distance, but from home ground, because I think it is important to sometimes look at the big picture from a small lens, because when you go into the details of what is actually happening, you understand the dynamics better than sometimes giving broad statements. South Asia's potential, South Asia is going to be the engine of growth for the world. There is no doubt about that. The doubts are, will we allow the next generation, or at least an older, when we grow old, to be able to see that South Asia, or will we leave it for, decades more to get sense? I'm hopeful on this also because I believe that we are moving away from the generation which had seen the partition, which had seen the blood in partition, which had raw memories of very, very difficult times. I'm a generation which did not even see the 1971 war. I was born in 1977. So I believe when you come from a generation which has not lived through those very difficult war times, I can be taught hatred, but it will not be part of my DNA. I will tend to reject it very quickly. So I will tend to carve out my own way. And I'm very happy that, I want to give a lot of credit for this to, of course, the party that I represent, to the Pakistan People's Party, because all of our leaders, whether it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, whether it was Benazir Bhutto, and whether it is Asif Zardari today, have been committed to the region. I mean, as foreign minister, I know that the advice that I would get from my prime minister or president was only the region. We had to manage. We had to give time to the US because of Salalah attack, etc., etc. Given an option, if those issues had not erupted, we would actually end up giving absolutely no time to. I mean, with the European Union, yes, we wanted market access. With Canada, we have excellent relations, and good relations, ones which are dependent on development swaps, and really. So where you have good, decent relations, you don't need to give a lot of time. Where you have difficult relations, you need to correct the wrongs. So I like to believe that in some ways we were able to contribute towards correcting those wrongs. And I'm very, very, and this is, I just want to leave you with this because I think this is important, because all of you are hearing and seeing pictures of Pakistan, where you're seeing, a Canadian national, a dual Canadian-Pakistani national, Mr. Qadri, holding the whole government hostage, together with the cricket star who believes he's a rock star and he can get away with murder. Holding, so with 20,000 people to 50,000 people, you're holding the whole mandate of 180 million people hostage. And you believe because you have 20,000 people on the street, you can challenge the mandate of 180 million people. So be it. I mean, so you might get these images, but I want you to know that this is in some ways the mature democracy presenting itself in Pakistan. My party, the Pakistan People's Party, 10 years from today, had we been presented on a platter the chance to topple a PMLN government, we would have grabbed it. And look at what we're doing today. We are literally holding the balance between the preservation of the PMLN government or, re-election, breakage of the system. So this is how democracy has matured in Pakistan. And it is truly in this sustained, mature democracy that I have no doubt this narrative that I've told you of a new foreign policy dimension of the regional pivot of Pakistan will continue to hold. I was delighted. One of my favorite phrases to use when I was foreign minister was that Kabul is the most important capital for Pakistan. And I was delighted when we saw Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif visit Kabul, and in his statement came the phrase, Kabul is the most important capital for Pakistan. So I did not tell him that, but they picked it up, right? Because that impression, that mark was left by the Pakistan People's Party government, and this is a mature democracy, that you carry on the good work, you carry on the good legacy. So with that, I just want to thank you and to say you've been a brilliant audience, and it's really my privilege to be in an audience like this where you have students, where you have academics, where you have professors, where you have industry leaders, where you have, leaders from practically political leaders, some who are obviously at least Pakistani origin, some who are not Pakistani origin, Indian Consul General, Pakistani Consul General. So it's really a privilege to be able to speak to as informed a crowd as this one. So thank you.
Thank you, Hina. That was a lovely insight. So we will be now taking questions. I'll request people to raise their hand, and we'll take one question at a time. There.
Thank you, Foreign Minister, for an excellent and inspiring speech. And I couldn't help notice your discussion, I think, about Iran, which leads me to, I guess, your views maybe on the role of Pakistan in perhaps, I don't know, helping in another region of the world, which I think is close to Pakistan, namely in the Middle East. And as you know, it's being riven by Sunni-Shia conflict. And I think the fact that Pakistan can maintain excellent relations with Iran in the midst of all this suggests that maybe Pakistan has a role to play there. I know it's out of the scope of your talk, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, now maybe I should just share the podium. Okay, so to be quite honest on that, I cannot say we have burnt midnight oil on it, but I can certainly say this is something which has crossed our mind, okay? And as you know, with Saudi Arabia, with Bahrain, with the UAE, we've always had excellent relations. So the GCC countries have been part of, Pakistan's one of the priority areas within Pakistan, strategic relations with many of those countries. So now it is not unknown to anyone that there's a conflict between the two, one group or some countries and Iran. And there's obviously an ethnic or a Shia-Sunni dimension to that. I think my take on this, and I can tell you as Foreign Minister, my take on this as Foreign Minister was that Pakistan is a country which has too many worries of its own, which has too many internal interests to preserve, to get involved and embroiled in others' problems. And Pakistan is a country which has to first secure itself. We have Shias that I'm proud to say I never know are Shias, or Sunnis that I'm proud to say I never know. So we have, if you look at the DNA of Pakistani society, it's not it's not divided. We don't feel venom against a Shia, or the Shia doesn't feel venom against a Sunni. It's not, and we do not want to give rise to that. We want to coexist peacefully. And the moment we get ourselves embroiled in these disputes, we become a party. And we have decided not to become a party.
Excuse me. I just spent a week in Winnipeg with relatives from India who are quite excited by the election of the new government, the new Prime Minister Modi, who has given immense hope to Indians for future prosperity. What hope does it give to Pakistan?
Well, he took away all hope that he gave to Pakistan. I'll be honest with you once again. I was in India, I was in New Delhi, 3 days after Prime Minister Modi took oath. And I almost became enveloped by the electric hope that this man had been able to generate in New Delhi. And I felt very jealous, positively jealous, as a well-wisher. Jealous of the hope that this man had been singularly able to create. He had given hope to the businessmen, to the politicians, to the reriwala and to the driver, and everybody. All of a sudden seemed anything was possible in India. And I was just sort of tempering everyone by saying that, listen, it's very difficult to deliver in a state or in a province in Pakistan and India, and very difficult at a federal level because the federal structures, ours are very similar and are very, very convoluted. Nevertheless, I was interviewed by Karan Thapar, and in that interview I remember saying very categorically that I'm very hopeful from where we are today, because I would rather have a strong Indian Prime Minister who wants to contribute to 50% to peace than a weak Indian Prime Minister who wants to contribute 100% to the peace. And in the person of Prime Minister Modi, one saw a strong person who was strong-willed, who had the ability to deliver, and he could My only concern was that, God forbid, he becomes unpopular within India, then he might use the Pakistan card because to appease his right-wing sort of supporters. Now, as I said, I mention it everywhere I go because I could not have been more deeply disappointed by a single act of diplomacy or foreign policy management than Prime Minister Modi's decision to call off Foreign Secretary level talks. On what pretext? On our High Commissioner meeting a Kashmiri leader, which is done every day, which has been done by every High Commissioner that preceded this High Commissioner. So when you do that, you're actually almost backtracking and going to a position from which you will not be able to climb down and become, how will you restart talks now? We are not going to stop meeting Kashmiri leaders because Kashmir is an internationally recognized dispute. It is a dispute which is recognized between India and Pakistan and has been part of the composite dialogue, has been part of the resumed dialogue. We keep on, we are interesting people, we keep on changing the nomenclature. We say, oh, composite dialogue sounds too serious. Let's call it revived dialogue. Or revived dialogue still sounds too committing. Let's call it just dialogue, just a meeting. So he just called off just a meeting, and on a pretext which cannot be justified. So taken away all hope. But as I said, I being an indefatigable optimist on this, I believe that this was a big diplomatic faux pas. It was a mistake of a proportion that I don't think he has committed on any other front. We still have hope from the fact that he is he's delivered on many counts. There's the Gujarat killing sort of baggage that he carries. But we forgave that baggage when we sent our Prime Minister, and the Pakistan People's Party contributed to that. Because even before the Prime Minister had accepted his invitation to go to his swearing-in ceremony, we came on record and we said, had we been in government, we would have accepted it long ago. Okay, so again, we need to mutually dance to moving forwards. We can't take one step forward and 3 steps backward.
Okay, we'll have a quick question there.
Yes, thank you for coming out. Pakistan has been the biggest loser post 9/11. It sacrificed essentially itself as a country. Wondering if you could comment and kind of share your experience with the U.S.-Pak relations and that relationship of convenience. And one small question: any regrets being a foreign minister?
Okay, absolutely no regrets. I think I enjoyed every moment of it. It was something which required a great deal from any individual, and I was very happy to have been. And as I was sort of sharing with Marine while we were driving down from Montreal, from Ottawa actually, that, it's interesting that the decisions which are the most difficult and which make your life miserable while you're in government or when you're in a position are the ones that you're the most proud of when you're not in government. So, for me, I think opening up trade with India was one of them. Reaching out to Afghanistan, allowing India to be on the table, not allowing India as if we have a veto power on it, but some people in Pakistan believed they had a veto power on being on the conference on Afghanistan where India was. So these type of things which were very difficult to do, allowing some commissions to come to Pakistan, being an open. I think the thing that we try to engender was that let's be an open society. We have nothing to hide. If people believe we are doing something wrong, the only way we can prove that they're wrong is allowing them to come and see, allowing them to come and experience. So on the Pakistan-US, interestingly, Pakistan-US relations have been very interesting. They have gone through all sorts of transformations and permutations. And I believe they have typically been overemphasized in both the countries than their due share, okay? For us, US is an important partner on many, many different fronts, but it is an important partner. It is not the determinant of Pakistan's future, as many people in Pakistan believe it to be. So during our time, I think we were going through a very difficult time. In US, with the US, a lot of their politics and their executive decisions are dependent on what is happening domestically in the US, okay? So till the time Afghanistan was high on the agenda and it was front page news at New York Times and Wall Street Journal, there was lots of stories vis-a-vis Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, etc. Now that has died down, Syria and other countries have overtaken, I think we are learning to coexist peacefully. And really, I think it's a relation which is improving from the, very, very low depths that it had seen during Salala, etc. These are real events. You can't shoo them away. We had 24 soldiers dead. The NATO supply route got blocked. This was something which the US didn't like. We didn't like 24 soldiers dead. All of those things happened, but we recovered from it. And I think we hope to have good economic relations and generally we do have a lot of dialogue in Afghanistan. I think we are learning to agree with each other much more than we did in the past, even on Afghanistan. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome MJ Perry now to thank our guest on our collective behalf.
I don't think I'll ever be invited to join the diplomatic corps because my first reaction is, wow. I thank you for coming. Like many who have no personal or business relationship with Pakistan, my experience has been from the headlines and the odd sporting event. And I would like to thank you today for your patience in educating, for your gentle correction when we unintentionally offend, for your understanding of our trying to grasp the relationships you have given to us. And I thank you for all of this and hope, on behalf of the whole club, and hope you continue to build bridges and move on. Thank you.
I'd like to extend a few final thanks before you all head on your way. Thank you very much to our generous sponsors. Our event sponsor today is Spencer Stewart, and our VIP reception sponsor is Hamilton Airport. I would also like to thank the National Post as our print media sponsor and Van Valkenburg for providing our AV support. We are on Twitter and Facebook, as well as online at www.empireclub.org. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is now adjourned.